I didn't mean to open the email. I was just trying to clear the clutter before the Monday stand-up when my name showed up on the CC line like an accident waiting to happen. The subject read offer letter, welcome aboard, and the number that jumped off the screen made my throat go dry, $84,000, plus a signing bonus big enough to replace the tired tires on my 10-year-old Corolla 3 times over. I sat there in my father's old swivel chair, smelling burnt coffee and the sweet chemical warmth of the copy machine, and stared at a figure that was 40% higher than mine after 9 loyal years. The weirdest part wasn't the number. It was the last name on the offer. It matched the name on the cake sitting in our break room. Welcome, Jenna. And it also matched my brother's fiancé's maiden name, which meant the newcomer was not a newcomer to my family at all. We're a family business, the kind where the sign over the loading dock still says Harper and Daughters, even though my dad started calling it Harper and Sons as a joke after Mark came home from community college with a forklift certification. We distribute janitorial supplies to school districts across Northwest Ohio, which sounds boring until you realize schools run on toilet paper and floor wax, and somebody has to get it there before prom, or everything falls apart. I started at 19 labeling boxes and answering phones while taking night classes at Owens, and most days since then have been some version of the same. Spreadsheets that never end, drivers who need a map and a kind word, and superintendents who want a discount on something that costs what it costs. I was at my desk on the first Monday of April when the email landed, the one with the numbers that told me exactly how much loyalty was worth. The carpet under my chair was thin where Dad used to tap his heels. It had a spot you could feel with your shoe, like a reminder that nothing in this place gets replaced until it fails completely. I watched my brother walk past my door carrying a box of sample mop heads, whistling. He stopped in the doorway and asked if I'd seen the Guardians opener on TV. I said no, and he laughed and said I needed a life, and then he glanced at my screen in that nosy way he has and pretended he didn't see anything before he said, "Big day," like we were all celebrating the same cake. My palms felt sticky. I put my phone face down and closed the email, then reopened it because closing it didn't make it less true. The offer was for logistics coordinator, which is the title I hold. The only difference I could see, besides the salary, was the name attached to approval. It wasn't Dad's. It was Linda's, my stepmother's neat signature block followed by interim HR. She likes to put words like interim in her titles. It makes everything sound provisional and important. I took 2 sips of lukewarm coffee. The bitterness helped. The first act of the day played out with cake crumbs and paper plates. Linda made a speech about fresh energy and modern systems, and my aunt, who does our books and calls herself CFO when she wants to feel fancy, stood beside her like a bridesmaid at an office wedding. Dad leaned against the break room counter, eyes on the floor tiles that always look like they need mopping no matter how much you clean them. Jenna introduced herself like she didn't know half the room from Thanksgiving. She was wearing a new jacket and one of those thin gold necklaces that catch the light. "I'm excited to learn," she said, and she glanced at my brother with a smile I recognized from family photos. Bright, careful, calculated. After the cake, Dad asked me to show her the route planning software. "You're the expert," he said, which would have felt good if my chest hadn't been tight. I opened the program and walked her through the color codes while my heart beat too fast, and whenever she said, "Oh, cool," I heard, "Oh, easy." At lunch, I drove to the credit union and sat in the parking lot with the engine idling, watching a woman in a puffy coat pull a wad of coupons from her purse before going into the bakery next door. I called my neighbor Joyce and told her I wasn't sure if I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. Joyce has known me since I was a kid. She taught me to check oil and not to apologize for existing. "You saw it," she said. "You know what you saw. What are you going to do?" I said I didn't know yet and that I felt stupid for not asking for more money years ago. "You're not stupid," she said. You're used to being the one who makes things run without making noise. I watched a truck back too close to the curb and bump it just enough to make the whole thing shudder. I told Joyce I'd call her after work. I turned off the engine and went back inside because going home wouldn't help. The confrontation happened that afternoon when the sun came through the high windows and made the dust look like we'd been slowly evaporating for years. I asked Linda if we could talk, and she said always, like she was a guidance counselor. I told her I'd seen the offer. Her mouth made a small circle and then flattened. She said I shouldn't have been in that folder, which was not an answer. I said I'd do payroll when Aunt Candy can't, which is always on the last Thursday before payday when the numbers don't tie. She said we needed to be competitive for new talent. I said 40%, and my voice stayed steady, which surprised me. She asked me not to make this about family. This is business, she said, and she smiled like people smile when they won't admit they're trying not to. Dad walked by and stopped when he saw our faces. Everything okay? He asked, and Linda said, just standard onboarding, and then she looked at me, and I understood the line she was drawing. Family when help is needed, business when it's time to pay. I wasn't loud. I told Dad exactly what I'd seen and asked if he knew. He rubbed the seam of the paperwork in his hands. We had to move fast, he said. Mark says she's an investment. The word investment is a strange thing in a place like ours. It usually means someone we love is expensive. I asked Dad if 9 years wasn't an investment. He opened his mouth and closed it. Linda cut in with a tone she uses when she wants to sound like a fair judge. There's more on Jenna's plate: marketing, vendor relationships, growth. I said those are words, not responsibilities. Dad asked if we could discuss it at home, and that's when I understood that the line wouldn't protect me there either. I said, no, we'll discuss it here, and I saw him flinch the way he does when the radio at the warehouse crackles too loud. By 5, the warehouse smelled like dust and diesel and whatever someone microwaved that shouldn't have been microwaved. I stayed to finish the quarterly inventory report because the auditor from the district would want it on Tuesday after PDA. I'd promised Mrs. Madden I'd be done by then, so I could help set up chairs at the school. Out in the yard, drivers lined up their rigs like dominoes. I printed the report and watched the pages slide out warm into my hand. The numbers felt like a language only I still spoke. When I turned off my monitor, I saw my reflection for a second, tired eyes, hair pulled back, a line I don't remember having last year. I headed for the door and nearly ran into my brother. You okay? He asked, almost convincing. I said, I will be, which is what you say when you won't cry. He shifted his weight. Don't make this weird, he said. We're trying to grow. I thought about growing like ivy and about eviction notices. I told him I wasn't making anything, I was noticing. The second weekend of April brought a cold snap and a town-wide garage sale that made traffic worse than a Friday night baseball game. I set out a card table in Joyce's driveway with a box of paperbacks and a coffee maker that sputtered but refused to die. I needed the distraction. People stopped by and touched things and told stories about their own versions of our stuff. That's the thing about garage sales, you end up listening more than selling. Around 10, my Aunt Candy showed up with a bag of scarves and a look that meant trouble. She kept her voice low as if bargains had ears. I need to show you something, she said, and she pulled a folded printout from her purse. It was a draft of the new org chart with my name sliding sideways like a label that couldn't find a home. Logistics coordinator reported to operations, which reported to Jenna, which reported to Linda. I felt the world tilt an inch. Where'd you get this? I asked. She said she cleans out the printer tray when she's bored. Her hands shook a little. The scarves quivered. Don't say I told you, she said. I like my desk. I put the paper under a stack of cookbooks and took a breath that didn't go deep enough. Sunday, Dad asked if I'd come to church and then to lunch at Gus's diner. I said yes, because I wanted to believe he could still choose me even when it hurt. The sanctuary smelled like old wood and lemon cleaner. Pastor Gale preached about fairness, which felt like a dare. After the service, Dad and I sat at the counter at Gus's where the baseball game played muted on the wall and the coffee tasted better than ours ever does. He took too long stirring sugar into his cup. "You know I'm proud of you," he said, watching his spoon, not me. I nodded and waited. He said the industry had changed and that Jenna had knowledge we needed. I asked what knowledge. He said social media and vendor relationships like he was reading off a napkin. I asked if he'd read my report from last quarter when I renegotiated the Stark County contract and saved us $12,000. He said he remembered. His voice said he didn't. He reached for the salt shaker and moved it 2 inches to the left. It's a habit he has when he wants to fix what isn't a table. "I'm asking you to be patient," he said. "Things will balance." I felt my jaw clench. "They're not scales," I said. "They're people." The week after, I tried the reasonable path because I wanted to look myself in the eye when this was over. I emailed Linda a simple request to review my compensation and role. I attached a short list of what I do that no one sees: building the bid packets, catching expired certificates, calming angry principals, spending Saturdays relabeling product when the vendor sends us the wrong UPC. I didn't include the part where I bring Dad dinner when he forgets to eat. She wrote back with a meeting invite for the last Thursday before payday, which is when people are too tired to fight. I walked into the conference room with a folder and came out with a headache because the meeting wasn't a review, it was a script. Linda smiled like a dentist and told me how much she valued my history and my calm, and then suggested a title change to senior coordinator without a meaningful raise to position you for future growth as budgets allow. "What budgets?" I asked. "The ones that allowed 84? She used the phrase market pressure 3 times. Dad looked at his hands. Jenna took notes and once tried to make eye contact in a way that said, "We can be friends if you stop minding." I kept my face neutral because I know they call me emotional when I let it move. Here's the part one hadn't told anyone yet because I was saving it for when it would count. 3 years ago, after a rough winter when we almost lost a key contract and Aunt Candy had the flu and I slept on the office couch twice because a shipment went sideways, I started a small LLC on the side. It wasn't a competitor, it was a safety net. I called it On the Dot Ohio and used it for consulting work with 2 small districts outside our region that wanted help writing RFPs, so they didn't get pushed around by vendors. It was honest work with open records, nothing sneaky, and I did it in the evenings from my kitchen table with a pot of tea. I kept it quiet because family makes anything you do that isn't them sound like betrayal. By the time the offer email hit my inbox this April, On the Dot had a handful of clients who sent me questions at odd hours and paid their invoices on time. I never planned to use it as leverage. I just wanted to know I could breathe if the floor gave out. But leverage is sometimes just breath you saved for later. I drove home after the meeting and parked a block away because I didn't feel like being in front of my own door yet. The sky had that pale Ohio gray that makes everything look like a documentary. I scrolled my phone without seeing anything until a message from Pastor Gale popped up. She asked if I could swing by the church office to look at their vendor quotes for switching cleaners because the current company kept missing Thursday night trash, which is a bigger problem than it sounds when you host 2 AA meetings and a youth group on Fridays. I almost said no because I wanted to crawl into bed, but I said yes because I needed to do something I was good at. I sat in her office with a pencil and circled lines that didn't make sense and called a number to correct a fee that looked like it had been invented. "You have a gift," she said, and I laughed and told her my gift was knowing what things should actually cost. She asked me how I was, and the question landed hard. I told her a version of the truth. She said, "You can be kind and still draw blood when you need to." I didn't sleep much that night. I got up at 3 and made a list of what I knew for sure: my salary. There's the timeline, the clients who trusted me, the part of me that had stopped apologizing for existing. I thought my next move would be slow, but the escalation came for me. Saturday morning, I stopped at the warehouse to pick up my notebook and found a patrol car idling by the curb. One of our drivers had backed into a neighbor's mailbox, and the neighbor, who has a history of calling the police first and everyone else second, was telling the officer a story that made it sound like we'd crushed a fence and 2 dogs. I apologized, exchanged numbers, promised to send our insurance info, and asked the officer if we were good. He glanced at the truck and at me and nodded in a bored way like he wished he were anywhere else. After the patrol car pulled away, Linda stepped out of the office and said, "We can't have you speaking for the company without authorization." I laughed because otherwise I would have said something I couldn't unsay. "Who do you think answers the phone at 7? I asked. "Who do you think knows what to say when people are scared?" She blinked slowly. "Chain of command matters," she said. "It keeps us safe." I felt the flutter in my chest that precedes crying, and I swallowed it like a pill. On the drive home, I passed 3 yard signs for high school baseball fundraisers and one for a church fish fry and wondered when everything that was supposed to be simple got complicated. The first piece of the hidden truth revealed itself the Tuesday after PTA when I was refiling vendor agreements and found a copy of a proposal on Jenna's desk with my name removed from the contact line and hers added in neat black ink. It wasn't a signed document. It was a draft with sticky notes that said "Send Friday" and "Push to close end of month." The proposal was mine. I had written it in February and kept it on hold until the district finalized their budget. The ink wasn't a mistake. It was an intention. I stood very still and listened to the hum of the building. The lower events that never quite heat the office enough. I put the paper back exactly where I found it because I am not a thief. I walked to Dad's door and saw him through the glass holding his head in his hands. I didn't knock. On my way out, I texted Joyce, "It's worse." She wrote back a single word, "Dinner." I said yes. Then I drove home with the radio off and my jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. That night at Joyce's table, over meatloaf and green beans, she said the thing no one in my family would say. "They are daring you to leave." I stared at my fork. "I don't want to burn the house down," I said. She shook her head. "You don't have to. You just have to turn off the gas they think only they control." I laughed, short and ugly, because it sounded like a line from a show, and that is not my life. Joyce reached over and put her hand on my wrist in that firm way she has. "You already have a lever," she said. "Use it." I took a breath, felt it settle. "If I pull it," I said, "I can't go back." She nodded. "Then don't." The following Friday, the last one before the end of April, I went into the office early. The building felt different before 7, quieter and more honest. I printed copies of my work plan, my wins, and the list of tasks no one sees. I wrote a short, clean email asking for parity, not favors, not family grace, just numbers that looked like reality. I gave them until the end of the day. I didn't attach a threat. I didn't need to. I had a calendar reminder set for 5 p.m. With one word, decide. By noon, I'd gotten 2 replies, one out of office from Linda because she'd taken Jenna to a vendor lunch, and one from Aunt Candy that read, "You know I love you," which told me everything about where her line was. Dad didn't respond. I brought the mail in from the box out front because someone had to. I made the deposit because someone had to. At 4:50, I put on my coat and slipped my notebook into my bag. At 4:58, my phone buzzed with a meeting invite for Monday morning with a subject line that said, "Role alignment." I clicked decline. Then I clicked send on a different email I'd written at 3 a.m. to the superintendent in Woodford, the one I'd helped with their RFP last year, and to 2 other contacts who'd asked me once if I'd ever consider going solo. I didn't say I was leaving. I said I was ready to talk if they were. When I walked out into the parking lot, the air had that late April bite, and I could smell somebody grilling 2 blocks over. Baseball sounds floated out of someone's open garage, a facetious announcer calling a strike like it was a personal insult. I unlocked my car and sat without starting it. My hands shook in a controlled way, like the tremor after a hard run. I thought about what Pastor Gale said, about being kind and drawing blood when needed. I thought about my dad's fingers moving the salt shaker and about the way my brother avoided my eyes when he joked. I put both hands on the steering wheel and held on. I wasn't going to burn anything down. I was going to flip a switch they didn't think I had. And before the month ended, before the first Monday of May, before the second weekend's garage sales, I would either be paid what my work was worth, or I would make sure our biggest contracts learned that the person who had kept their floors shining had a name, a number, and a plan. I spent most of Saturday night sitting cross-legged on my living room floor with invoices spread out like a paper barn quilt. The TV low in the background with baseball highlights looping through the same 3 home runs and a weatherman warning about frost on the first Monday of May. I told myself I was only organizing for Monday, but really I was trying to slow my breathing. I built neat stacks, Stark County shipments, Woodford's floor finish rotation, Athens's bid packet from February that still needed one attachment from purchasing. I wrote on the dot in tiny letters on a yellow sticky and slid it under my keyboard like a secret handshake with myself. Around midnight, Joyce texted a photo of the church bulletin from Sunday fish fry on the second Friday, rummage sale sign-ups, Pastor Gale's note about fairness tucked between a hymn number and a nursery rotation, and added, "You know your worth. Make them know it too." I stared at those words until my chest loosened enough to lie down. I didn't sleep well. My jaw pulsed like I'd been chewing ice. Monday came like a slow car in the right lane. I brought donuts because I always bring donuts the first Monday of the month, even though half the guys claim they're cutting carbs and then take 2. When I set the box on the break room counter, Jenna said we should switch to a fruit tray to model wellness, and someone snorted, which I pretended not to hear. I took my seat and opened the dispatch dashboard. A red notification blinked at me like an irritated eye. Access permissions changed. My stomach dropped the way it does when you miss a stare. I tried again. Same message. I called out to payroll, and Candy leaned around her monitor with her mouth forming a sorry before the word came. "Linda says we're consolidating tool seats," she said. Email went out Friday night. I checked my inbox. Nothing. I stood up, walked to Linda's door, and tapped the frame. She looked up with that slow calm that makes you feel like a child who interrupted study hall. "We need to talk about my access," I said. She clasped her hands. "Jenna's centralizing ops touches," she said. "You'll still own the daily build-out." There was no still left in what I saw. I could feel the heat behind my eyes. "You took the map and left me the sticky notes," I said. She smiled in a way that wasn't a smile. "This is business, not personal." I understood that we had crossed a line that couldn't be redrawn with coffee and a pep talk. By noon, the day had acquired a humming tension like a refrigerator that's working too hard. Drivers popped their heads in with questions they normally asked me. I pointed to Jenna. She answered with confidence that didn't yet have wisdom in it. At 1, she sent a group email announcing a streamlined approvals pilot that required all purchase orders over $200 to route through her and Linda. I watched the replies stack up, Aunt Candy's thumbs up emoji, Dad's okay Mark's high five gif. I kept my hands flat on my desk because if I started typing, I might not stop. At 3, the vendor from Akron called my cell because he prefers actual voices to emails. He asked where to drop the rush order for custodial carts for the Woodford Middle School. Same Bay 3, same contact on the door, I said, and then, because saying nothing isn't always kind, I added, Flag the invoice with a copy to Jenna. He paused. You leaving us? He asked. Heard a rumor. My back muscles pulled tight. I'm still here, I said. Today. At 4, I drove to Dad's house because I was tired of pretending that the office was the place for truth. Linda's SUV was in the drive. The yard looked like a magazine picture, new mulch, the flag unfurled just so. Dad was in the garage, leaning on the workbench he never uses anymore, turning a screwdriver in his fingers like it might give advice. You changed my access, I said. I didn't soften it. He winced like the words had weight. We need to give Jenna room to run, he said. She can't if you're in every screen. My throat tightened. I built those screens, I said. With you. At 2 a.m., 3 winters in a row. You remember? He nodded. He remembered, and that almost made it worse. I'm asking you to trust me, he said. We need to think like a bigger outfit. Linda came in through the door to the kitchen with a stack of printed org charts and said it was time to talk growth. She set the papers down and handed me a page with my title neatly italicized under a smaller box than before. We're excited to see you thrive, she said. The room smelled faintly of cut grass and plug-in vanilla. I folded the paper once, then again, and slid it into my bag. I'll send you my proposal in the morning, I said. Not for growth. For parity. Linda's smile stayed, but her eyes cooled. The numbers don't support that, she said. They support this. I looked at Dad. He looked at his hands. Then the numbers aren't honest, I said, and I left because staying would have meant crying, and I've learned that tears are treated like admissions of guilt when you're asking for what's fair. The next afternoon brought the kind of complication you don't expect when you think the worst that can happen already happened. Around 2, a district procurement officer called to say she'd received a duplicate email from our company about the summer floor finish bid, one from me dated in February with attachments, and one from Jenna that morning with different pricing and a note suggesting I'd been transitioned out of bid management. The officer, who knows me from a dozen site visits and more than one late Friday emergency, asked gently if everything was okay. I felt my face heat. We're reorganizing titles, I said. Pricing shouldn't change. She hummed the way people hum when they're not sure whether to step into someone else's family mess. The new number is higher, she said. And there's a line for a consultation fee to On the Dot Ohio. That adds 5%. I went very still. Could you forward that? I asked. She did. When the email landed in my inbox, my stomach flipped. There it was, my LLC's name, a line item that didn't exist in our old proposals, a description that implied we were outsourcing work I do at my own desk. I printed the page and stared at it until the toner dots looked like a field of nails. I walked the sheet to Dad's door. He wasn't there. Linda was. She took one look, recovered fast, and said, "We're trying a new model where we compensate external consulting for efficiency." I held up the paper. "That's my company," I said. "You used my name to add a fee." She waved toward the chair like I was being dramatic. "You're overreacting," she said. "It's just a placeholder. We'll route it correctly." My hand shook. "To who?" I asked. She said we'd discuss when I'd calmed down. I left the paper on her desk and went to the loading dock and stood in the smell of diesel and rain for 5 solid minutes so I wouldn't do something I'd regret. Down by the dock, Mark found me and leaned on the rail like we were 13 again, hiding from chores. "Everyone's on edge," he said. "Don't take it so personally." The muscles in my jaw twitched. "They put my company on a fee line to justify a price hike," I said. "That's not personal? That's my name." He made a face like the details were boring. "Linda says it's standard. Consultants do it all the time." I counted to 5 the way my therapist taught me years ago when I needed practice not letting other people's comfort shape my tone. "Do you know what consultants do?" I asked. "They sign agreements. They pick terms. They invoice." That wasn't me. He shrugged. "Don't make this a hill to die on. My laugh came out sharp. I'm not dying, I said. I'm deciding. He looked away first. That night, I went to the school board meeting in Woodford because they were voting on their summer custodial budget and because sometimes sitting in a room where numbers get approved one page at a time calms me down. The superintendent spotted me and waved me over to the side aisle like a friend at church. He asked if I was available the first Tuesday after Memorial Day to help train 2 new custodial leads on inventory controls. We'll pay your standard on-the-dot rate, he said. I stared at his mouth to make sure I'd heard what he actually said. You know about on the dot? I asked. He smiled. You helped my sister in Athens last fall. People talk. I felt my shoulders drop a notch. Yes, I said. I'm available. He glanced toward the dais, lowered his voice, and asked if everything at our company was stable because he'd gotten mixed messages this week. I told him I'd ensure continuity, one way or another, and the shape of the words in my mouth scared me a little because they sounded like a promise with a deadline. The first Friday of May, I took a personal day using the PTO I almost never use, and I drove to the county office to check filing records because I wanted to make sure Linda hadn't done something with my name I couldn't unwind. The clerk at the records counter knows me from church rummage sales. She slid the log across without flair and let me stand there as long as I wanted. There was nothing new under my LLC, which should have felt like relief, but the emptiness tasted like metal. I grabbed coffee at the diner and read the local paper while I spooned sugar into a cheap mug. A small column on page 2 made my vision narrow for a second. Regional distributor to announce strategic partnership. The quotes belonged to a competitor out of Toledo, one that has sniffed around our accounts for years. The announcement date circled the second Monday of May. I folded the paper and put it in my bag. I drove to the park where the town had set up a few garage sale booths early and walked past card tables of old board games and stacks of dishes, past a man trying to sell a broken snowblower in May, and I breathed until the clench in my chest loosened. I called Joyce. They're courting a partner, I said. Of course they are, she said. You going to keep letting them practice on you while they do it? I sat on a park bench and looked at the kids on the swings. No, I said. I'm done being the practice surface. I thought I was ready for whatever came next, but the escalation found another rung. On Monday, my building badge didn't open the side door. I had to go through reception like a visitor. System update, the receptionist chirped, cheeks pink with discomfort because she's not paid enough to stand between people and the machines that deny them. I waved, walked in, and found my desk looked just slightly wrong. One pen moved. My stapler turned 90 degrees like a picture frame someone dusted without asking. An IT note sat on my keyboard saying my laptop would be swapped for a standard issue unit at noon. I kept my face blank. At 10, an officer in a blue polo with our patch, but a contractor's badge came into the office to conduct a workplace safety check that involved asking whether any recent conflicts might escalate. I realized then that Linda had put a note in a file somewhere painting me as a problem to be managed. The humiliation washed up my neck hot and prickly. I answered the man's questions with steady sentences. When he left, I stepped into the bathroom, locked the stall, and braced my hands on my knees, breathing. My palms were damp. High-pitched sounds were suddenly annoying. The hand dryer made me flinch. I texted Pastor Gail, then deleted it, then texted again. I need to borrow a room for a meeting that might decide the next 10 years, I wrote. Her reply pinged before the typing dots finished dancing. Fellowship Hall is yours Tuesday at 6. On Tuesday, I wore my navy blazer, the one that makes me feel like my spine has a stronger opinion, and I put my hair up because I think better without hair on my neck. I loaded my laptop, the original one I wasn't surrendering yet, into my tote, along with 3 manila folders and a clean legal pad. At 4, I walked into Dad's office with a printed agenda for a 6 o'clock off-site conversation and handed copies to him, to Linda, to Mark. I need 90 minutes, I said. Neutral ground. Linda laughed the way people laugh when they think they're in charge. We can talk here, she said. No, I said. We can't. Dad started to say something, then stopped. He looked tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. He nodded once. We'll be there, he said, and Linda's mouth tightened because she wasn't used to losing small votes. Fellowship Hall smells like coffee, floor wax, and old hymnals no matter how many times we repaint. I set up a rectangle of tables so no one could sit at the head and arranged folding chairs in a way that made it harder to whisper without being noticed. I made a pot of coffee and put out styrofoam cups and sugar packets because details matter even when you're angry. At 5:50, Aunt Candy arrived with a clipboard and a face that said she was going to pretend she wasn't picking a side. At 6:05, Dad came in wearing his jacket from the Christmas parade, the one that still has a small smear of hot chocolate on the cuff. Mark followed, bouncing his keys against his palm. Linda came last, on the phone with someone she called Jay in a tone that sounded like debriefing. I waited until her call ended. I put my palms flat on the table to keep them visible. It helps me slow my breathing. Thank you for coming, I said. This will be short if you want it to be. Linda sat back like there was a show. Go ahead, she said. I walked them through a concise timeline. The offer that landed on my screen with a number 40% above mine, the access changes, the feline that used my LLC's name without my consent, the public note in the paper about a competitor's partnership announcement. I didn't raise my voice. I used dates. I used dollars. When I mentioned the duplicate bid email, Dad's eyes closed for a second. That wasn't supposed to go out yet, he said, and Linda shot him a look sharp enough to slice a stapler. We're adjusting to growth, she said. Sometimes the process is messy, but the outcome will be good. I slid a one-page plan across the table, 3 copies. Parity or I exit with a non-compete that protects you and a severance that recognizes 9 years, I said. Or we restructure with clear roles and an actual raise this quarter. My voice didn't wobble. I have never been more proud of a tone of voice. Mark gave me a look like I'd just asked him to donate bone marrow without anesthesia. Where do you get off making demands? He said. This is family. I inhaled slowly through my nose. Family doesn't use my company's name to pad a bid, I said. Family doesn't lock me out of the tools I built. For a moment, the room was very quiet. The hum of the vending machine in the corner the only sound. Aunt Candy coughed and finally did the thing I needed someone else to do. She slid a different paper out of her clipboard and set it in the center. You should see this, she said to Dad, not to Linda. It was a summary of receivables pledged to an operating line from a bank I didn't recognize, dated the second week of April. Signed by Dad and by Linda as interim HR and acting operations. My heart thudded in my throat. You borrowed against districts that pay in July, I said. Dad rubbed his temple. Cash flow, he said. Just a bridge. The number on the page wasn't small. I looked at Linda. And when the bridge doesn't hold? I asked. She smile winced. That's what a partner is for, she said. We're finalizing terms. It will be good for everyone. There it was, the part of the hidden truth you can feel coming and still hate to see. They were selling our choices in exchange for a parent company and calling it growth. My hands tingled. Is Jenna part of the terms? I asked. Is that why she came in high? Linda's silence answered before her words did. Compensation aligns with market for strategic roles, she said. Dad glanced at me like he wanted me to stop. I didn't. I won't sign a non-compete that gags me from work I built with my own hands, I said. I won't pretend I didn't see the math. I won't pretend I can't read a calendar and understand July payments come when July comes. My chest was tight, but my voice held. Here are my terms, I said, and I didn't sit down because standing makes it harder for someone else to talk over you. Equal pay to Jenna's base plus a written role that includes bid authority and tool access, effective now. No fee lines using my LLC's name. A commitment in writing that any partnership decision includes an employee vote that actually counts. And a one-time bonus tied to the Stark County savings I secured last quarter. Or we separate with a neutral reference today, and I take my LLC without interference. My brother laughed without humor. You can't bluff us, he said. I shook my head. I'm not bluffing, I said, and then I set the final page on the table, a letter of intent from 2 districts to retain on the dot to write and manage their RFPs this summer if I was available as of the first Monday of June. It wasn't a contract. It was interest on letterhead, which in the world we live in is the difference between a wish and a plan. Linda's eyes flicked over the letter and back to my face. You've been building this behind our backs, she said. I kept my voice even. I built this on my own time with open records and public rates, I said. I never touched proprietary lists, I never used your contract prices, and I never billed a minute to you while doing it. I asked a lawyer 2 summers ago to make sure I wasn't crossing lines. Dad looked like he'd swallowed a battery. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then said, "Small, you could have told me." I closed my eyes for 3 seconds because that little sentence pushed hard at my ribs. Every time I tried to tell you something that made you uncomfortable, it became about my tone, I said. So I learned to do things quietly. For a minute, we all just breathed and listened to the vending machine hum. Pastor Gail stepped into the doorway with a quiet knock, like she sensed the temperature. "Ice water," she asked, and set a pitcher on the table, then disappeared as if she'd been trained in de-escalation. Linda studied my terms, then stacked the pages and aligned the corners like straight edges could unbend reality. "We'll consider," she said, which is what people say when they want you to wait long enough to doubt yourself. "You have until Thursday at noon," I said. "Then I move." Mark's jaw clicked. "Move where?" he asked. I looked at the letterheads. "Forward," I said. They left in a small tornado of polite chaos, chairs scraping, keys jingling, promises of follow-ups that sounded like smoke. Aunt Candy squeezed my hand and whispered, "Proud of you," out of the corner of her mouth like it might break some internal company rule to say it too loud. Dad stayed a minute longer. He reached out and touched the back of one of the metal chairs the way he touches table edges when he doesn't know where else to put his hands. "You're good at this," he said. I swallowed. "At what?" I asked, because I wanted to hear what word he chose. He stared at the floor and said, "At being the adult." Then he left, and I stood in fellowship hall alone with coffee smell and a stack of papers that suddenly felt like both a shield and a weight. Wednesday morning, the office was quiet in a way that comes before weather. People looked up from their screens when I walked in, then looked down fast. I kept my head up, said good morning to the receptionist, put my lunch in the break room fridge, and turned on my lamp. At 9, an email from Linda pinged into my inbox with the subject line, "Interim Adjustment." It offered a $5,000 bump, a title that added senior but removed bid, and a sentence about revisiting the pay structure in Q4, pending partnership outcomes. I felt the insult like a cold hand on the back of my neck. I printed the email and took it to the loading dock where the air smelled like possibility if you squinted hard enough. I called Joyce. They countered with a pacifier, I said. She made a sound that wasn't a word. "What does your gut say?" she asked. My gut said to stop wasting time on people who thought I'd be soothed by words that didn't bank. My fingers stopped shaking. "I'm moving," I said. The rest of the day I spent clearing what I could without setting fire. I documented a dozen open items with dates and contacts in a clean note and emailed them to a general inbox so no one could claim I dropped the ball. I put a printed copy on Dad's chair because paper still means something to him. I took the family photo off my desk, Not the fancy portrait from a summer no one remembers fondly, but the Polaroid of Dad and me in the warehouse with a hand truck and 2 cases of floor finish stacked crooked because we were laughing too hard to balance them. I slid it into my tote. At 4, I took a slow lap through the aisles just to say a private goodbye to the place where I learned to carry more than people expected. At 4:30, I sat at my desk and wrote 2 letters. One polite resignation addressed to HR and Dad with my last day set for Friday at 5. One to my district contacts letting them know I was moving to consulting effective the second Monday of June, with a promise to keep things smooth during the overlap. At 4:58, my hands stopped sweating. At 4:59, my phone buzzed with a reply from Woodford. We'd like to begin paperwork Monday. Congrats. At 5, I clicked send on both letters and listened to the small whoosh sound the email makes when it leaves your life. At 5:05, the loading dock door rolled up and sunlight hit the concrete in a way that made dust look like glitter if you were in a forgiving mood. I put my tote over my shoulder and walked toward the parking lot. Linda stood in the doorway to the office with her arms crossed, head tilted in studied disappointment. You're making a mistake, she said. I kept my voice level. Maybe, I said, but not the one you think. She shook her head and said she hoped I understood the consequences of walking away from family. I thought about washing coffee cups after everyone left church dinners, about delivering a rush order on a Sunday afternoon in February to a school that had run out of gloves because someone miscounted, about 9 years of a salary that bought the donuts everyone loved to lecture me about. I do, I said, and then I walked past her into air that tasted like the first inning of a night game, crisp and loud and full of small noises you can only hear when you're not trying to be quiet anymore. I sat in my car with my hands on the wheel and let my body shake the way it does when adrenaline is finished with you and wants out. Then I laughed once, a short burst that sounded a little wild, because I had actually done the thing I told myself I was brave enough to do. I drove to Joyce's and found a plate of lemon bars already on the porch with a sticky note that said, "For the beginning." We ate them at her kitchen table while the local news droned on about a city council meeting and a small-town mayor stepping down for family reasons, which made both of us say, uh-huh, at the same time. I showed her the Woodford email. She squeezed my arm. Jaws will drop, she said, and I realized then she was talking about more than a number on a screen. On Thursday morning, before I turned in my badge, I stopped by Pastor Gale's office with a check for the church's custodial fund. Not large, but not nothing. For extra liners and a better mop, I said. She took it without fuss and then looked at me like she was measuring the weight I was carrying. How's your breath? She asked. I inhaled and surprised myself by not catching halfway. Better, I said. She nodded. The first Sunday of June, we're recognizing volunteers, she said. You want to hand out the bulletins? I smiled because she knows handing out bulletins is the church equivalent of announcing to a small town that you're still here. I'd like that, I said. On the way out, I passed the youth room where 2 teens were painting a banner for homecoming in the fall and arguing about fonts like it was a life choice. It made my chest ache in a good way. Friday would be hard. Monday would be harder. But the second Monday of June had a shape that fit in my mouth like a word I could say without swallowing it first. I walked into the office for my last full day with a box that used to hold copy paper and now held my coffee mug, the cheap plant that refuses to die, and a notepad with a grocery list I started in a meeting and never finished: eggs, dish soap, dog treats for a dog I don't have. Dad was standing by my desk. He looked like a man trying to solve a puzzle with 3 edge pieces missing. You don't have to do this, he said. I set the box down. I do, I said. He nodded like maybe he finally believed me. He reached into his pocket and took out the Polaroid I'd left on his chair years ago and then taken back yesterday. Keep it, he said. I'll remember without the picture. My throat tightened. So will I said. He cleared his throat. Mark will be mad. I shrugged. He already is. He nodded again, the way you nod when you're trying to make your body agree with your life. I spent the day doing the quiet work of a clean exit. I met with 2 drivers, handed over my handwritten routes for June as a gift instead of a lever, and showed Jenna the part of the spreadsheet that always misbehaves in July so she wouldn't email me in a panic later. She kept her chin high. No hard feelings, she said in a voice that wanted mine to echo it. I said, I hope you learn fast, which is the kindest thing I could honestly offer. At 4:30, I sent one more email to the company list, short and simple, thanking people for 9 years of showing up early and staying late and laughing just enough to survive the rest. I didn't mention the number or the cake or the word interim. I signed it with my full name and my cell, not my title, and added a line, if you need bid language in a pinch, you know where to find me. At 4:59, I took a last look around the office. The carpet under my chair still had the thin spot from Dad's old heel tap. The smell of hot dust from the copier seemed louder than usual. I pressed my badge into the receptionist's hand. Thank you, I said. Her eyes looked glassy. You kept the wheels on, she whispered, and I walked out before I let that sentence melt me where I stood. I didn't look back when the door clicked shut behind me. I got into my car and turned the key and sat with my fingers on the steering wheel while the radio found a baseball game in the 4th inning and the announcer explained something obvious, as if it were news. I let my hands stop shaking. I let my jaw unclench. I let my shoulders drop. Then I drove to the school district office in Woodford and handed the secretary a folder with a printed copy of my proposal and my LLC's W-9. She stamped the receipt with a satisfying thunk and said, Our superintendent is in a meeting, but he told me to tell you, welcome aboard. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my body needed to do something that wasn't clenching. I drove home with the window cracked even though the air was still cold, because that's what fresh air feels like when you've been breathing dust a long time. On my kitchen table, I spread out a new set of papers, my schedule for the first 2 weeks of June, a list of supplies I needed for training sessions, and a note to myself that said, call Dad Sunday. Offer dinner on neutral ground. Revenge can be loud, but it can also be a quiet refusal to disappear. My final move wasn't fireworks. It was a door closing, another opening, and the knowledge that next time someone sent an offer letter across my screen with a number that told me my place, the only CC line that would matter would have my own name on it. I sat in my car outside the office on the last Thursday before payroll, watching coworkers file in with their pumpkin lattes and backpacks slung lazily, like we were all still in college. A few of the new hires walked past, laughing too loud, talking about their starting salaries like they'd won the lottery. 40% more than me. After 9 years. 9 years of fixing their mistakes, covering late shifts, saving clients that the company nearly lost. My throat was dry, but my hands were steady as I reached for the folder on the passenger seat. Inside were copies of emails, contract drafts, and a resignation letter, though the letter wasn't going to be the highlight of the morning. When I walked in, my boss, Mr. Kavanaugh, was already at his desk, sleeves rolled up like he'd been hard at work since dawn. He smiled thinly. Alicia, you've been quiet lately. Everything all right? My voice didn't tremble when I answered. Actually, I'd like a quick word with you and HR. Today. His eyebrows lifted. He wasn't used to me requesting anything. He gestured toward the glass conference room where the HR director was already preparing coffee. I followed, my heels clicking on the polished floor louder than I expected. Once the door was closed, I set the folder down between us. For 9 years, I've done the work of 2, sometimes 3 people. I've documented every project, every hour. And yet, when you brought in new staff, You offered them 40% more than me. I asked for a raise. You said the budget was tight. But here's the thing, I opened the folder and slid the papers across. I've been consulting quietly with one of our largest clients. They've offered me a director-level role starting next month, at nearly double what I make here. And here's another thing, I placed a stack of emails on top. These are messages where you admitted to covering up errors by the new hires so the board wouldn't notice. I haven't shared them. Yet? The silence was heavy enough to choke. Kavanaugh's face went pale. The HR director looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I leaned back in my chair, calm for the first time in weeks. I'll make this simple. I'm leaving today. You'll pay me my accrued PTO and 2 weeks severance. In return, this folder doesn't leave the room. But if you so much as delay my final paycheck, every board member will receive a neat little package on Monday morning. Do we understand each other? Kavanaugh stammered something about loyalty, about how this wasn't necessary. I stood up, sliding the resignation letter across the table. 9 years of loyalty, Mr. Kavanaugh. And this is how you repaid it. Consider this my final project delivered on time. By lunchtime, I was packing my desk. Coworkers whispered, watching me wheel out a small box of belongings. A few looked curious, a few looked almost proud. But no one knew the full story except me. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, biting my cheeks as I walked toward my car. I wasn't just leaving a job. I was leaving behind the version of myself that waited politely for recognition that never came. That Friday, while my old office scrambled to manage payroll and rumors spread like wildfire, I sat in a downtown cafe across from my new employer, signing the final contract. The salary number looked surreal on paper. More than double what I'd been making. I thought of my kids' college fund, the mortgage payments that would no longer keep me awake at night, the vacation I'd promised them for years. For once, time felt like it was finally on my side. The following Monday, my phone buzzed nonstop with texts from former coworkers. What did you do? Everyone's talking. Kavanaugh looks like he's seen a ghost. I typed back the same reply to each. Sometimes the only way to be valued is to walk away. And that was the truth. Not loud revenge, not chaos. Just quiet, steady proof that I knew my worth better than they ever did.